Hi, King Dan here. This video is called Jamal vs. Lourdes, my top 5 lists. This video is a random compilation of my opinions as I look back at the case. Alright, first, top 5 myths. Alright, the first myth was that it was a personal conflict between Jamal Johnson and Lourdes Schwartz. But if you read the actual text, which clearly not many people did, it was put in painstaking detail and thought to make this an argument between a citizen, represented by Jamal Johnson, and an person in the archangel position, represented by Lourdes Schwartz. 2. Lourdes was the victim. It is true that Lourdes was the defendant in the case, but the plaintiff, Jamal Johnson, only made the case against her after he himself felt his rights were violated, or his rights as a citizen of Cheongguk. So actually, Jamal Johnson was the victim who cried foul and said, "Hey, whoa, we've got a problem here." All right, 3. Early supporters are immune. Now, this is one that Hyunjin interestingly peddled. I don't know where it came from, but it's not logical at all. So the argument is that because Jamal and Lourdes are both early supporters of the king, somehow they're both immune and there was no issue. But even in that argument, it implies that it was a citizen versus citizen dispute, which it wasn't. And also, look what happened to Father's early disciples. Where's Reverend Kamiyama now? Where's Reverend Kwok now? Clearly, being an earlier supporter doesn't have much weight if you really think about it. Alright, and if that didn't convince you, here's one. So in 1,000 years, in the battle of Gog and Magog, both sides are presumably in God's lineage. But clearly, there are two masters. 4. It should have been private. The fact is that the Jamal vs. Lourdes issue did go through the biblical process before the case even went to a public level. But all the attempts to resolve the issue privately fell through, and actually if you look at the Lourdes' pattern of behavior, she was using privacy as a kind of a demonic manipulation of the circumstances. Privacy was the cover, and a high noon culture was the solution. 5. The case was dismissed prematurely. A lot of people were actually upset at Uncle Jamal for dropping the case. Usually the argument is you had to prove that you're sovereign, you had to respect your own sovereignty, and you had to show the power that you have as a citizen of Cheongguk and a child of God over someone in a position of archangel. But that's a fallacy. You don't actually have to prove to Satan that you're willing to do God's work. You don't have to prove anything to Satan. All right, the top 5 disappointments. The office of the Inspector General. What good is it to have Kook Jin-moon as the Inspector General when he not only doesn't do his constitutional duty, but it's his employees that are actively violating the rights of citizens of Cheongguk? Go figure. Due process is ignored. If you watch my other videos, this was an important one for me, and there clearly wasn't due process. I didn't care if Jamal or Lourdes won or lost. For me, it was about due process. But in my opinion, Uncle Jamal got royally screwed. 3. No transparency of the docket, which is like the court documentation and public communication. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that the only time you actually saw the contents of the case is because I spent the last year going through the material and documenting it for you. If you want to have the actual documentation, just ask. It's supposed to be public information, but therein lies the lack of transparency. Public relations bias toward Lourdes. If you heard anything about the Jamal vs. Lourdes case, you probably heard it from either Hyunjin or something from the King's report. But even then, you really only ever heard the viewpoints of the Canaanite perspective. If there was a back and forth, then it was kind of like Hyunjanim was caught between the politics of his brother and the principles that he inherently believes in. 5. The community reaction was a big disappointment. Ultimately, there's a lot of people trying to shame or socially ostracize Uncle Jamal when all I got was that he was following his conscience. But really, what it did reveal was a culture of kingship relativism directly with and around the king. So even when I'm making this video, I feel like there's some pressure or expectation that I'm supposed to be not doing this video. But if truth is treason in the empire of lies, let's go to the actual truth. I've tried to do the best I could in making these videos actually on the documented material presented in the Jamal vs. Lourdes case. Alright, since this is going to be my last Jamal vs. Lourdes video, I wanted to end on a positive. So this slide is called the top 5 blessings. 1. It started the separation of the Cain type and Abel type. You may not see it for a couple more years, but this case really started the division between the people who choose principles over politics, and eventually you'll see it as the people who choose absolute sex over freedom society. 2. It began constitutional discernment. Father is quoted as saying that the Constitution is to protect his country, but if the citizen or a citizen can have his rights violated, then it clearly didn't work. So this case ended up being a test on the spirit of the Constitution. So 3, it exposed the deep state. Lourdes Schwartz ended up exposing Tim Elder, and then Tim Elder ended up exposing their corporate sponsor, none other than Cook Jin Moon. 4, it also revealed the spirit behind Sanctuary Church. We're back in Family Fed, folks, and in this case, it's a ends justifies the means spirit that may take more time for you to see, but it's definitely there. And I certainly don't trust my civil rights to be honored and protected if the Jamal vs. Lourdes case was any indication of how due process will be actually treated. 5, it clarified that only lineage and family matters in life. I rebuke anyone, myself included, who puts personal delusions in church politics over the value of the blessing in absolute sex. Yep. So these were my top 5 blessings. Obviously, they were my opinions, but for me, the Jamal vs. Lourdes case only was a blessing. And no matter what anybody else says, that's okay. You can shoot the messenger all you want, but you wouldn't have got the facts if I didn't spend a lot of time going through the material myself. And depending on which Hyunjanim you get, Hyunjanim said the Jamal vs. Lourdes case would ultimately be a blessing, and I believe him.